The store was quiet in a way that didn't feel empty, just paused. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and thin, like a sound you only notice when everything else is gone. The aisles were narrow, stocked too tightly. Instant noodles, bottled drinks, snack packets hung in neat rows that never quite stayed straight. I had spent the first hour of my shift fixing them, aligning edges, pulling labels forward. They never stayed aligned. There was a convex mirror mounted in the back corner above the refrigerated section. It showed the entire store in a warped, fisheye curve, every aisle bending inward, every shelf leaning slightly as if the space were softer than it looked. I checked it without thinking. It was routine. You glance up, confirm nothing's off, move on. Everything was always where it should be. Until the door chimed. I didn't hear it open, just the soft electronic note, delayed by a fraction, as if it had waited for something. A man stepped in. He didn't look unusual. Mid-30s, maybe, dark jacket, hands empty. His shoes made almost no sound against the tile, which I noticed because everything else did. The hum, the faint buzz of the drink coolers, even my own breathing. He walked past the first aisle without looking at anything. Then the second. He didn't browse, didn't hesitate, just moved toward the back, toward the mirror. I straightened behind the counter, watching him through it. The convex surface caught him, stretched his shape slightly as he approached. For a moment, the angle made it look like he was walking deeper than the store allowed. Like there was more space behind the refrigerators than I knew. He stopped directly beneath the mirror. Didn't turn around. Just looked at the shelves. I waited for him to pick something up. He didn't. After a few seconds, he spoke, his voice calm and level. "Is the aisle behind the mirror accessible tonight?" I thought I misheard him. "Sorry," I said. He turned, finally. His expression didn't change, no smile, no confusion at my reaction. Just neutral, like he'd asked where the restroom was. "The aisle behind the mirror," he repeated. "Is it open?" The fluorescent hum seemed louder then. I glanced up at the mirror without meaning to. It showed the same warped view, the same shelves, the same man standing beneath it. "No," I said after a moment. "There's no aisle back there." He held my gaze a second longer than necessary. Then he nodded like that answer had been expected. "Right," he said quietly. He turned and walked back down the aisle. This time, I heard his footsteps, soft but distinct. The door chimed again as he left. I didn't move for a while. The store settled back into its usual stillness, but something had shifted, faintly, like the air had thinned. I looked up at the mirror again. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the phrasing. Not what's behind the mirror, the aisle behind it, like it was part of the store. I told myself it was nothing. People asked strange things late at night. I'd heard worse. I forced myself to focus on small tasks, restocking, wiping the counter, checking expiration dates. But I kept glancing at the mirror. At some point, I noticed the delay. It was subtle, not something you'd catch unless you were already looking for something wrong. I reached for a bottle beneath the counter. In the mirror, my hand lagged. Just a fraction, less than a second. I froze. Then I moved again, slower this time. My reflection followed, but not perfectly. It trailed me, like it was catching up, syncing itself to my motion. I let go of the bottle. In the mirror, my hand stayed closed for an instant longer before releasing. The hum of the lights deepened, or maybe I was just hearing it differently. I stepped out from behind the counter. The floor felt colder. There was a draft now, faint but constant, brushing against my ankles. It seemed to come from the back of the store, from the mirror. I walked toward it slowly, keeping my eyes on the reflection. My movements and theirs didn't match. Not exactly. The shelves behind me, perfectly aligned in reality, appeared slightly shifted in the mirror. A row of drinks leaned too far left. A hanging strip of snacks twisted in a way I knew it didn't. When I stopped, the reflection took a moment longer to settle. Like it needed time to become still. I stood beneath the mirror where the man had been. Up close, the surface didn't look like glass anymore. It had a faint dullness, like breath had fogged it and then been wiped away, leaving streaks too thin to see directly. I exhaled. My breath should have fogged it. Didn't, but in the reflection the glass clouded. Slowly, as if someone else had breathed onto it from the other side. I stepped back immediately. The fog in the reflection lingered, then thinned, revealing the warped aisles again. Except, there was something off. The angle showed more depth than it should have. Behind the refrigerators, where there should have been a wall, the reflection stretched further. The space extended into something that looked like another aisle, dimmer, narrower, stocked with shapes that didn't quite resolve into products. I blinked. The image snapped back. Just the wall. Just the mirror. I swallowed, my throat dry, and turned to look directly at the spot behind the refrigerators. Solid. Flat. No space for anything else. When I looked back at the mirror, the reflection was already different. The aisle was there again. Faint, but unmistakable. And it wasn't empty. Something moved within it. Not clearly. Not in a way I could define. Just a shift like a figure passing between shelves too tall for it. I took another step back. The draft grew colder. The hum of the lights wavered, dipping slightly in pitch. In the mirror, the perspective changed. It wasn't fixed anymore. It adjusted subtly, as if trying to show me more. The hidden aisle widened, the angle tilting to reveal deeper rows. And at the edge of it, a shape, standing still. I couldn't see details, just an outline, darker than the dimness around it. Watching, my reflection didn't look at it. It looked at me, directly, even though my real gaze was fixed on the shape behind it. The delay was gone now, or maybe it had been replaced with something else. The reflection lifted its hand. I hadn't moved mine. It pressed its palm against the inside of the mirror, fingers splayed. There was no corresponding movement on my side. But I felt something, a faint pressure in the air, just in front of my face, like a hand held close enough to touch without making contact. The shape in the hidden aisle shifted again. Closer. The reflection's fingers flexed slightly against the glass. Inviting. I stumbled back, the heel of my shoe catching on the tile. The motion broke the alignment for a second, the mirror snapping back to its normal distortion, the aisle vanishing. The pressure disappeared. I stood there, breathing too fast, staring at the empty reflection. Nothing moved. Nothing lingered. Just the store. Just the shelves. After a long moment, I forced myself to look away, to focus on something real. The counter, the register, the small digital clock blinking above it. 2:17 a.m. I hadn't realized how much time had passed. The door chimed again. I flinched. Another customer stepped in. This one didn't say anything, didn't even glance at me. They walked straight to the back, to the refrigerators, stopping beneath the mirror. My chest tightened. "Hey!" I called out, my voice thinner than I expected. "Can I help you with something?" They didn't turn. For a moment, they just stood there, head tilted slightly upward, looking into the mirror. Then quietly they asked, "Is it open now?" The draft brushed past me again, colder than before. I looked up at the mirror. In the reflection, the hidden aisle stretched wide and clear, shelves lined in perfect rows that extended far beyond the limits of the store. And at the very end of it, something stood waiting, facing forward, as if it had been expecting the question, as if it had heard mine too. The store always smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant after midnight. Not strong enough to notice right away. Just something that settled in the back of your throat if you stood still long enough. The floors held it. The tiles never looked dirty, but they never felt clean either. There was always a film, something you only really saw when the light hit at a certain angle. I had the mop bucket out behind the counter, half filled with cloudy water that had gone gray from the aisles. It was the same plastic bucket we'd always used. Yellow once, now dulled and scuffed along the edges, the wringer slightly warped so it never quite aligned. The wheels clicked softly when I moved it, a small, repetitive sound that felt too loud in the quiet. The fluorescent lights above hummed in that steady, narrow way they always did at night. No music. No customers. Just the store holding itself together. I dipped the mop back into the bucket and pressed it down into the wringer. The metal creaked faintly. Water ran back in, rippling the surface. For a moment, I looked down without thinking. The reflection was wrong. At first, I thought it was just the angle. The water wasn't perfectly still, and reflections in it always warp things. Stretching, bending, shifting depending on where you stood. But this wasn't distortion. The shelves in the reflection didn't match the shelves around me. They were arranged differently, taller maybe, or closer together. The labels didn't line up. The colors were off. Not brighter or dimmer, just not the same. I stilled the mop, holding it just above the water. The surface settled slowly, the ripples smoothing out into a flat, dark plane. The reflection sharpened. It showed an aisle, not mine. I looked up immediately, my eyes tracing the real shelves in front of me. Snacks, drinks, the same narrow spacing I'd walked through all night. Then I looked back down. The aisle in the water was deeper. The lighting above it was harsher, colder. The fluorescent hum seemed to come from there instead of here. I shifted slightly, testing it. The reflection didn't follow me correctly. My body moved, but the perspective in the water adjusted differently, like it belonged to a separate space with its own angles. I told myself it was just the bucket, the curve of the plastic, the uneven water. I lifted the bucket handle and rolled it a few inches forward. The wheels clicked. The reflection stayed steady. Not perfectly, there was the faintest ripple, but the aisle didn't change position the way it should have if it were reflecting the store around me. It stayed fixed, like it existed independently. I crouched down a little, bringing my face closer to the surface. The smell of disinfectant was stronger there, sharper. My reflection appeared at the edge of the water, but it wasn't centered. It stood slightly off to the side, as if I were positioned somewhere else in that other aisle. I leaned in closer. In the reflection, I leaned too, but a fraction late. The delay was subtle, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking for it. I froze. In the water, my reflection finished its movement a moment after I had already stopped. The fluorescent hum seemed to dip, then return, like a breath taken too slowly. I straightened up, my heart beating harder than it should have. The bucket sat there, still and ordinary. The water didn't move. I told myself to look away. Instead, I crouched again. This time, I focused on the aisle behind my reflection. It extended further than it should have. The shelves stretched back, repeating in a way that didn't match the layout of the store. And there was no end wall, just more shelving, fading slightly into dimness. I watched, waiting for something to shift. Nothing did. Then, at the edge of the reflection, something changed. Product, one of the bottles on the shelf, tilted. Just slightly. I looked up immediately. The real shelf in front of me was still. Everything aligned. Everything untouched. When I looked back down, the bottle in the reflection was upright again. Perfectly still. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My reflection stared back at me, but not quite. It was facing forward, looking into the aisle behind it. I wasn't. I turned my head instinctively, glancing over my shoulder at the real store. Nothing there. Just the same narrow aisle, the same products, the same quiet. When I looked down again, my reflection turned its head, slowly, deliberately, until it was looking at me. The movement didn't match mine. It happened after I'd already stopped. A thin cold draft brushed past my hands. I pulled them back instinctively. The water didn't ripple. It stayed perfectly still, the surface too smooth, like glass. I reached out again, slower this time, stopping just above it. In the reflection, my hand kept going. It lowered further, closer to the surface than mine actually was. I froze. The reflected fingers hovered just above the waterline. Then gently they touched it. The surface didn't break. No ripple. No distortion. It was as if the water accepted the contact without reacting. I jerked my hand back. In the reflection, my hand stayed there for a moment longer, resting against the surface before lifting away. The delay was longer now, more noticeable. I stood up too quickly, the motion sending a faint slosh through the bucket. The water shifted slightly, but the aisle didn't. It held steady as if anchored somewhere else. I stepped back, putting a little distance between myself and the bucket. The store felt quieter now. The hum of the lights thinner, stretched. I could hear the faint creak of the refrigeration units at the back, cycling on and off. Everything normal. Everything wrong. I forced myself to move around the counter, to put something solid between me and the bucket. From there, I looked at it again. The angle changed, but the reflection remained consistent. The aisle was still visible, still too deep, still not mine. And now, there was something in it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, a darker patch between the shelves. But it wasn't still. It shifted, subtle, slow, like someone moving just out of direct view. I leaned slightly to get a better angle. The shape adjusted with me, not reacting to my movement, anticipating it. In the reflection, my body moved again, a fraction too late. My head tilted. I hadn't tilted it. The shape in the aisle took a step forward. I didn't hear anything. No sound of movement, no shift of weight. Just the visual change. Closer. My reflection stood still now. Completely still. Watching. The shape moved again. Another step. The distance between it and the front of the aisle shrinking. I felt the cold draft again. Stronger this time, brushing past my legs. The bucket hadn't moved. The water was still. Too still. I realized, with a slow tightening in my chest, that the perspective in the reflection was changing. Not because I was moving, because it was. The aisle was getting closer, the front edge of it creeping toward the surface of the water, as if the boundary between the two spaces was shifting. My reflection took a step forward. I didn't move. It stepped closer to the edge of the water, standing at a position I wasn't occupying. The shape behind it paused, then adjusted, aligning itself directly with me. Not the reflection. Me. Another step. Closer now. I could make out more of its outline, tall, indistinct, like a figure seen through fogged glass. My reflection didn't turn to look at it. Kept its eyes on me. Unblinking. The shape moved again. The distance between it and the reflection closing. And then, the reflection leaned forward. Slightly, as if making room. The surface of the water remained perfectly smooth, untouched, but the aisle in it felt closer than the bucket itself. The shape took one more step. Now it stood just behind where my reflection should have been. Close enough that if it reached out, the wheels of the bucket clicked softly. I hadn't touched it. It shifted a fraction of an inch across the tile. The water didn't ripple, but the aisle surged forward. The shape moved with it, closing the remaining distance. And in the reflection, just before I forced myself to look away, I saw it raise something that might have been a hand, reaching toward the surface that hadn't yet broken.